The best coaches in the game, we really ain't playing. We regroup up in the Slack chat where the coaches debrief. We be piecing these puzzles, occupy the chunk of the pie. Ain't no lie when we hit the block, helmets casket is top. You be seeing helmet after helmet, helmet after helmet. First place, second place, fifth place, eighth place, 12th place, 15, 16, 20. So many helmets, you got blurred vision, we got too many. Tick your tech. Oh man, shit. They got us fucked up. Army, regroup. We pledge always to have that edge. We don't fire warning shots. Competition just drop. We locked and loaded before lock. Whatever the time, yeah. Do you even correlate?
Being the best requires a willingness to outwork your competition. There's always someone smarter, faster, sharper, more naturally gifted to come around.
All right, welcome back, DFS Army, to week 2 MME and Millie Maker review. Let's try this again. I just recorded pretty much the entire podcast, and then it cut out at the end, like the last 10 minutes. So let's give this a run again, and let's take a look back. All right, so over at dfsarmy.com, I write up the Millie Maker every week, in-depth look at stacking, ownership, leverage, ceiling, everything we can possibly learn about the Millie Maker on DraftKings. So this week, in fact, we're going to go over to Fantasy Labs. Hopefully, I think it's what's kind of crushing me as far as my internet connection. But we're going to look at the top lineup, and then we're going to look at some MME strategy from top DFS pros. All right, here we go. So this week we had Mad Cow, and this was the highest week I've seen in covering the Millie Maker in 2 years. So absolutely crushed it. 284 points from Mad Cow. And actually a really sharp player. So I want to look at both of his lineups real quick. He had a Tua stack. The big stack came back. So the quarterback +2 plus a bring back was back. And really, this was dominated in early 2020. And then we didn't see it much in 2021 as team stacks really took over as scoring was down. But it was back in week 2. So Tua, Tyreek, Jalen Waddle, Mark Andrews as the bring back. And then he had Nick Chubb and Jeff Wilson as one-offs, Greg Dortch, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jacksonville D. 284 points, scorching, but actually a really sharp player because he had 2 lineups in the Millie Maker, stacked 2 separate games, and scored no lower than 224 points. He had a Carson Wentz stack, kind of the same thing. Carson Wentz +2, Terry McLaurin, Logan Thomas with a Amon-Ra St. Brown bring back, smashed Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, same thing. He was pretty high on Chubb. Same thing with Hill. He made it in both lineups, and Amon. And then Jaguars. So very similar as far as the stacking, and then just extremely efficient. So this is an MME player, but definitely a player to keep an eye on to see what he's on, because it's really hard to be this lucky. I think this player is just really efficient in the lineups that he or she builds. As far as the Millie Maker, though, one thing that we saw in stacking was not only the big stack was back, the thick stack, but it was extremely efficient. I don't think I've seen a stack of 160 points, and I certainly haven't seen a stack with that many players, 4 players averaging 40 points. So absolutely crushed it with this one stack, and really it was just a 1 game stack and nothing else. And then ownership. So what we saw, a couple things. This stack was not only 40 points a piece, but is very low owned at 33%, 33.5%. He had 6 players at 10% ownership or less. What we saw with the total ownership was 95%, which was in line with what we saw in 2021. When it was about 96.5%. Now, That said, leverage. I mean, Tua, Hill, Waddle, Andrews, that is literally the definition of leverage in DFS. You stack 4 players, it garnered 33% combined ownership. In comparison, you had Carr and Adams in that same contest. That stack combined for 52% ownership between 2 players. So extremely efficient and top tier stacking and leverage plays. Other leverage plays, Jaguars D at 1.8%, which is really crazy because I even top DFS pros had the Bengals D in their lineups at 40%. Now, I'll probably give them a little credit because I'm sure that no one expected the ownership to be that high, to be 40%. Because if you study the contest, which, I assume top pros would, right? Because everything they do is based on the statistics. We've never seen a defense higher than like 14% in 2021, and 2020 I know definitely wasn't higher than 20%. If it was a little higher than 14%, what you see at defense is it busts more times than not. It doesn't matter how good the matchup is, it's going to bust more times than not. So you're pretty much going to want to play a defense that's low owned, that's 10% or less. 5% or less is ideal, as we saw at 7.5%. That was the average owned defense in 2021, with none higher than 14%. So Jaguars D at 1.8, awesome. Nick Chubb at 8.5, really good. He was leveraged off a lot of chalky backs who busted in relation to their salary. Christian McCaffrey, 11% owned, scored 19. Gibson, 19% owned, scored 12. Mixon, 15% owned, scored 11. Javonte, 19% owned. And then Barkley, 43% and only scored 11. So absolute smash from Chubb. And, a lot of people don't play Chubb because, he really doesn't have the floor always to get there, but he certainly had his ceiling game, even splitting carries with Kareem Hunt, because he can take it to the house on any play. So raise the ceiling, 284 points. This is the most I can ever remember from a Millie Maker winner. We had 279 points once in 2020. The highest we saw in 2021 was just shy of 270. This lineup absolutely smashed the 250 point target that you aim for in the size of this. And it's really something to keep an eye on, because through 2 weeks, we have a 67 point average, which is 30 points higher than the average we saw in 2021. Will this be the new trend, or will it regress back to the mean? This is something we're certainly going to have to keep an eye on, whether game stacks this big continue, or we go back to more team stacks and probably lower scores. So that said, let's take a look at some MME strategy real quick of some of the top pros. Now, the reason why we do this, and I want to preface this by saying I have listened to, some DFS pros, audio courses where they really talk about the fact that you can put positive EV lineups into large field GPPs, and it may take thousands of slates for that EV to be realized. So, when I first started playing, and, I joined DFS Army, and I was, listening to the coach's notes and using the optimizer and doing all the things I was supposed to do, and I was still getting my ass kicked in tournaments. And I was like, man, I suck at DFS. 2 things I learned. It was more so contest selection. And then secondly, you can make really good decisions in lineups that are actually set you up to win that tournament if those things go right. But that EV necessarily isn't realized, because you have to be on the positive side of variance, and it could take thousands of slates to figure that out. So when you start to study the lineups of pros, you see how much they actually lose, and it's a couple slates where they really do well that makes their entire season or their entire year, or even in some cases their entire few years. So for example, you have the top DFS pro in the world, Osimo, 150 lineups, negative ROI. 2 weeks of the season, negative ROI. His top lineup scored 169 points, which is not even 100 points of the winner. And this is the top guy in the world. So when you start to look at their exposures, his exposures, for example, you tend to see some positive EV decisions that necessarily didn't pay off. You get guys like Darrell Henderson, who he had 35% exposure to. Field only had 12% exposure to. Ben Skowronek, same thing. So this is a team stack that he targeted, hoping that the Rams just absolutely blow the doors off of, I believe they played the Falcons. And, they did, but not necessarily enough points to take down this large field GPP. So he attacked it from a lot of different angles. That was a game he heavily targeted. Matthew Stafford, 27% exposure. The field, 9. Higbee, 23. The field, 9. So on and so forth. And, Javonte Williams, some of these other guys, Hunter Renfro, he also had a lot of exposure to Adams. Did he probably do a double stack in some lineups? Also probably had, lineups where he had just Renfro off of by himself trying to get leverage off of Adams and so on and so forth. So these are some of the decisions you make that not necessarily pay off all the time, but over the course of a lot of slates, when you're playing a lot of volume, like, top pros like Osimo do, they will pay off. One guy I wanted to look at, Mclovin. Now, depending on where you look, Mclovin is actually the top DFS pro right now. So when I talk about playing a lot of lineups and, having that EV realized over a while, I played a lot of Mike Evans. I played a lot of Bucks and Saints stacks this past week. Didn't work out for me. But the thought process was right. If I can get Brady and I can get guys like Evans and Fournette in game stacks or team stacks or, game stacks with Michael Thomas and whatnot at low ownership, at pretty good pricing and a high ceiling, that's a play I'm willing to take. Mclovin was kind of doing the same thing. Evans, 22% exposure, field 4%. Gage, 18% exposure, field 3.5%. Fournette, 22% exposure, field 8%. So you can see, so on and so forth. Josh Jacobs, same thing. When we talk about, he didn't have a lot of Adams exposure. So direct leverage off of Adams, 22% exposure, field 8%. If everyone's going to be playing Card Adams, I'm going to play Josh Jacobs. Sure, Adams is the most likely to score 30 to 40 points, but what if Devontae Adams gets tackled at the 1 yard line a couple times and Josh Jacobs runs in a couple touchdowns, falls in the end zone a couple times and breaks one off? This is something that is likely to happen and can win you a large field GPP, but isn't necessarily the most likely to happen. So you're going to take some shots on that. So another pro I want to take a look at real quick, and I'm just having some connection issues today. Hopefully I'll be able to finish the stream. We are still connected. We're 13 minutes in. A couple more I want to look at before we get out of here so I don't lose my internet connection again and have to record this a third time. Chipotle Attic. Let's see. No, I don't want that. Chipotle. Okay, Chipotle Attic. Another one of the top DFS pros. Negative ROI. All in on Josh Jacobs, as we just alluded to. Had a lot of Christian McCaffrey exposure, of course, because the field was only 11%. Makes sense. He's got the type of ceiling. He's going to need 35 to 40 points at that salary, but you take some shots. Brashad Perryman. So a lot of pros were targeting the Bucks game, the Bucks and Saints. We'll go down a little bit here. Fournette, 22%, field 8. Also was heavy on that Rams game a little bit. Cooper Kupp, 28%. Maybe not. Cooper Kupp is just the type of player that you target because of his ceiling. It really at any exposure or at any ownership. So New Orleans Saints, heavy on them. Winston, Thomas, Juwan Johnson. So, these are the kind of stacks really that he was targeting. Mike Evans. EV is not always realized, but it's about making those leverage decisions. Last, Megan Joy, 2 weeks in a row, she has actually profited in the Millie Maker. She's an incredible DFS player. So her top lineup, and I heard a couple Osimo. It's interesting because I did hear someone say that he was all over the Tua Baltimore game and Tua stacks. Unfortunately, I just don't think he had it in the Millie Maker, but probably in other contests. But Megan was another one. Sharp DFS player, one of the top pros. Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Mark Andrews. This is the exact stack that won the Millie Maker. However, it just goes to show you have to hit every single thing. Christian McCaffrey, Javonte Williams, they didn't get there, especially Christian McCaffrey's salary, $8,900. Brashad Perryman, she was on him. Dortch, Jaguars D. So she literally had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 9 players needed to win the Millie, but the last 4 did not have. But she still won $750 in this lineup. She made $1,500 after MME entering the Millie Maker. And let's take a look at some of her exposures. So she was heavy on Mark Andrews. Barkley, I thought he was underpriced. Apparently she did too. She probably had a much better day if she had just faded Barkley, because 70% exposure. The field was 43%, but he busted. It was just a really bad day for backs. But as I mentioned, the Bucks and Saints, a lot of pros were on that game because really DFS is a numbers game and they're just playing the numbers. Brashad Perryman, 26% exposure, field 0. Less, almost 0, between 0 and 1. Evans, same thing, very high exposure, 30%. Gage, 21%. Fournette, 23%. Brady, 16%. So very, very good. And this is what it comes down to. Edmonds, Tua, Waddle, Jacoby Myers. So she was on the right game. She was also on some bad games, but her process led her to these players who, in some respects, in relation to their ceiling and their actual value, were underpriced, underowned, and sometimes they smash and sometimes they don't. That's what it takes when you're playing large field GPPs. As you would ask Rapid Fire XD, longtime DFS Army VIP who took down the Millie Maker last week, I'm sure he would tell you. In fact, I won't do that. I won't go to his. He did MME the Millie Maker this week. I looked, but I'm sure he would tell you he won the Millie Maker last week. This week, he didn't. He didn't win money. He MME'd the Millie Maker, but he won it that one time, and he's set up for years of playing DFS. He's now a profitable player. So it's studying those past contests and still making positive EV decisions and knowing that it's not always going to pay off, but when it does, it can make your whole season. It can make years for you, or you can make your DFS career. So we will continue to look back at these contests and learn as much as we can. We're always learning in this space, and move forward and try to smash next week. As Kevin Allen doing the back test each and every week, he will continue to do that to beat the Millie Maker. We will continue to look back on this podcast as well. Thank you for joining me. Like, comment, subscribe, and share, and also hit that notification button so that you never miss an episode. We will see y'all next week. We hope you have an awesome week winning another Millie. Take care.